This is the head unit out of my car, and there's a problem with it. So if we take a look here, I can play music. This is some non-copyrighted music from the YouTube libraries, so that I don't get like copyright claimed or whatever. And it's playing. We can mute it. It'll continue playing. We can like skip tracks. I'm not gonna do that because I just want to keep it on here, but we can tilt the screen down. We can pop a DVD in. DVDs play just fine. It has audio, etc. We can pop in an SD card. That works, except there's nothing on this card, so like I can't really demonstrate that. Android Auto works just fine. I just have it out in the middle of nowhere because I don't want to dox myself. The HDMI input works. As you can see, I've got it just hooked up to a Steam Link over here on the side. So yeah, the HDMI input works. It's not a big deal. Scaling's a little wonky, but I think that has something to do with the Steam Link, so it's not the screen. The backup camera works, except I don't have a camera hooked up to this, so you can't see it. But yeah, as you can see, pretty much everything is working fine. So by this point, you're probably like, I know, you already fixed it. Got him. And that's where you'd be absolutely wrong. See, there's one thing I haven't showed you yet, and that is these guys back here. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so as you've no doubt noticed, I've got two little speakers hooked up here to the head unit, and these speakers are being run off the internal amplifier. I only have the front ones hooked up right now, but if I were to hook it up to the rears, it'd be the same. They work fine. Okay, I've got the scope hooked up to one of the speaker outputs. Right now it's on the right. It's no particular reason. It's just that's what I hooked it up to. And if I play a 1 kilohertz tone on my phone, a sine wave, we get what we would expect to see. And it says right here exactly pretty much like 1 kilohertz on the readout. So that's fine. But watch what happens when we probe the RCA for the right-sided output. So there's my signal here, but I'm gonna have to turn it up here. And 200 millivolt per division, 100 millivolt per division. And yeah, it doesn't look all that great. It actually looks pretty crappy. So I'm going to disconnect the speakers here just so it doesn't get too loud. And I'm going to turn up the volume on the head unit. Yeah, lower it down here a little bit. Okay, so as we can see here, I'm at, geez, that's 50 millivolt right there. And it's still really, okay, there we go. You can see it better right there. As you can see, the signal looks kind of bad. I'm gonna turn this up here a bit, and it kind of distorts. And let's check one of the other outputs. So that's the right side. Let's check the left. Yeah, looks about the same. So it doesn't look all that great. Now let's check the rears. Yep, about the same. And yeah. So the problem is the pre-outs are not working like they should be, and I kind of sort of know why, and I already saw the evidence for it, but we're gonna see if we can possibly fix this problem. I don't know if I can because I don't know the extent of the damage. And what happened was my head unit is hooked up to a 5-channel amplifier. It's an older Memphis Bell with the Class D subwoofer output, and it's got the 4 regular channels. It worked fine. It worked totally fine. Well, one day I disconnected the subwoofer because I was doing something in the trunk, and I left the 2 wires that go to the subwoofer just kind of sitting there, except like, you know, I kind of bent them out so that they wouldn't touch each other, and you know, I wasn't going to put anything else in there, so I wasn't too worried about anything like shorting or anything. Well, I don't know exactly how it happened, but those 2 wires managed to touch each other. And I turned on the car, and I heard this horrible squealing sound coming from all the speakers in the car. So I immediately shut it off, and I went to the back to check, and sure enough, these 2 wires were touching each other, and well, that was kind of disappointing. So I just separated them, made sure that they weren't going to touch each other anymore. I kind of tied them off, and I turned on the car, and noise was gone. I was thinking like, oh, you know, cool, whatever, no big deal. Well, when I finally hooked everything back up, and I tried playing something through it, it sounded like crap. There was no bass, and there's a lot of the alternator whine coming through the audio system now. So at first I was thinking maybe something with the amplifier, because like I said, the 2 subwoofer outputs kind of like shorted each other. It wasn't until later that I found out that it was this thing that got affected, but it didn't affect anything else, only the pre-outs. And what I'm kind of having a hard time understanding is what exactly happened, because those two subwoofer outputs touching each other should really not have like done anything, because the subwoofer itself is only like what, like 4 ohms. I think it's closer to like 3 something on the one that I have, but I don't know. So to try to solve the problem, we got to take this thing completely apart, because the problem is on the board that's like way down here at the bottom, and the only way to get to that is to, yeah, dismantle the whole thing. So let's get started. This thing here is like the main CPU board for this thing, and like basically that's where the processor is. You can see the HDMI inputs, the USBs, and some other stuff. And this is where the Bluetooth module is, and it also has 2 SD card slots. This is the internal one, that's where the OS is stored, and then this is the one that's accessible from the outside for you to stick your music, video files, or whatever it is that you're gonna play on it. All right, we've arrived to the board where the problem is. Y'all ready for this? Sorry. Anyways, so there is the problem. So what we're looking at here is there's supposed to be 2 poly fuses right here. There's one right there that you can still see that's intact, and then there's a second one right there that's been blown to smithereens. What I'm kind of hoping for is that maybe all this carbon buildup around here is affecting the audio, and that's why we're getting like a really bad signal out of the pre-outs. What I'm kind of hoping not happened is that we didn't fry like any of the AD converters, or maybe some of the op amps or something. I don't really know exactly how everything's hooked up in here at the moment. I just kind of hoping that this didn't really affect anything like permanently, especially any of the parts that are custom numbered, like this Pioneer chip right here. Basically, I'm gonna have to replace this poly fuse right there, and I've already bought some on eBay. Actually, I put an order of like a bunch of parts for a bunch of these projects that I'm currently have on hold. So they say 0.7 or 0.75 and then 24, so I'm pretty sure they're 24 volt 3/4 amp poly fuses. And the way these poly fuses are wired in this circuit is they actually go to the ground connection on the subwoofer outputs, which are these 2 right here. And this radio, the way that these subwoofer outputs are connected is they're actually mono. So you get the same exact signal from both of these. And on my amplifier, since it's a 5-channel amp, it only has 1 subwoofer input. So I was only using one of these. I don't remember which one it was. But yeah, so basically I had no audio coming out of that output, and well, I mean, that would kind of explain why. So let's go ahead and clean this up. I'm going to get all that carbon off. I'm going to replace the poly fuse, and we'll test it again and see if it makes any difference whatsoever. If we're lucky, that's the only problem. If we're not, we're gonna have to do a little more investigating, but I'm really hoping that that's the only issue. And you can see down here with the eject mechanism for the display how a bunch of that carbon just kind of got shot all over the place here, or it coated like a bunch of things. Like you can see it on these gears. So I mean, that doesn't really affect anything down here, so that's not a big deal. But still, yeah, it smoked. And the funny thing is, I don't really remember smelling anything odd, or maybe I did and I just don't remember. But I didn't hear any fizzling because this is like in the dash. So let's see what we can do. Much better close-up of the board there, so you can see how this thing is just completely vaporized and it's in pieces. It's like crumbling. So this is going to be easy to remove. I'm just going to put some flux on it and desolder as much as I can off of it. I don't know if there's any traces that ran underneath this thing, so I guess I'll have to double check on that, make sure we didn't like vaporize anything down there. But soldering iron should be fairly warm now. I think maybe actually what I'll do, maybe I'll kind of clean some of this off first here, just kind of brush it off with this toothbrush. All right, now let's do some flux. Just kind of douse this area here. There it goes, there's one side. Okay, I believe that's the whole thing. Let's clean this up and see how it looks underneath. This is just alcohol. Oh wow, actually it doesn't look too bad. This stuff is just like spreading everywhere. Well, while I'm at it, I'm just going to wipe off as much of this carbon as I can. Holy crap, look at that thing. Oh, nasty. Okay, so there is a little trace that runs down there, but as you can see, it's still intact. Everything around here is intact. I'm just probably going to have to give it a really good cleaning just to make sure that I get all this additional carbon off. It's just really hard to get off with the alcohol for some reason. But the pads that the polyfuse went to, they're completely intact. So that's a good sign. This one, as you can see, is completely intact because that one wasn't affected. Okay, so I'm guessing maybe I had it hooked up to the right subwoofer output right here. As you can see, it says SWR right there, and this says SWL. And I'm assuming that the closest one here would be that one, and this one would be that one. It was a little more difficult to get all that carbon off of there than I thought it was going to be, but after dousing it with a lot of alcohol and brushing it all off, I finally got it to look fairly clean, and I don't think there's anything that should affect anything in the or anytime soon or in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up these pads now, make sure that they're nice and clean of the old solder. I'm going to put solder on one of the sides here, and these are the new polyfuses. You can see 075F, 24 volts, so pretty much the same thing, just slightly different color. And I guess it wouldn't really even have mattered if I had just jumped this thing across, since we saw how much that polyfuse did. I mean, whatever, we'll put a little bit of flux right here. Probably should have used a smaller tip for this, but oh well, it'll do. Alright, there we go. It's in place, and it should be making fairly good contact, but I can check the continuity just to double check. Okay, so there should be continuity between this, let's see, this trace right here and this big pad right here. And yeah, got continuity. So that's in place and it's working fine. The other one should be fine. Yeah, the other one was good. That one wasn't affected at all. And there you can see the area looks much better. I got rid of as much carbon as I could. We're going to find out and if anything else is damaged, and we're going to check to make sure that we're getting a good signal there out of the regular outputs. One kind of annoying thing about these head units is that they won't work unless they have the DVD drive installed. Otherwise it'll turn on, but it will not boot and it will not get you to the user screen or anything. So this has to be plugged in. Okay, that should be enough just to run a quick test here. Okay, I've got it all put back together enough to make it work, and I'm just going to kind of hold on to this here because the motorized sled here is going to move. We're going to first check the speaker outputs again. Normally this is not the kind of thing that you'd want to run without the heatsink on the amplifier, but I'm not going to actually hook up any speakers to it, so it's not really going to put much of a load on there, so it shouldn't get too hot, and it's not going to like fry right away or anything, but it's just something you don't really want to do too much. So let's go ahead and power it up. I made sure nothing is shorting, and the unit is on. Okay, so I'm back in Bluetooth mode here. I'm going to go ahead and play that 1 kilohertz sine wave again, and we should see it on the scope. 10, let's go to 2. Okay, well, oh yeah, and then the volume here is down too, so let's go ahead and turn it up, and there's our sine wave. So you can see it looks fine. It's what we would have expected to see. So now let's see what it looks like on the RCA output. So I'm gonna just leave that there, make sure it doesn't fall. I'm gonna switch the scope over to the RCA output, and if that was the only issue, then it should look pretty good. And okay, that's looking a lot better already, I think. 500 milli. Oh yeah, that is much better. Holy crap, I guess that was it. And Yep, there it is. There's our sine wave. It doesn't look all distorted anymore. Let's see, what can we do? Let's go ahead and, well, let's check all the outputs first. So that's the front right. This is the front left, and that looks fine. Let's check rear right. That looks fine too. And rear left. And that looks perfect. Okay, awesome. Okay, let's check the subwoofer outputs. That's one of the outputs, but we probably wouldn't expect to see much at the moment because it's at 1 kilohertz, and also the subwoofer output is not enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and enable that in the settings here. Subwoofer on. Okay, wait, subwoofer on. Okay, yeah, that's fine. All right, and we probably won't see anything because the cutoff is like, I don't know, 120 hertz or something like that. So let's go ahead and turn it down all the way to, go up a little bit, not 318, 107. Okay, we see a signal there. Let's turn this up here. Okay, that's a little too, oops. Let's go to 50 millivolts and let's turn this down. And there's our subwoofer signal. So appears that we didn't fry anything, or I didn't fry anything permanently. Let's check the other subwoofer output, and we should expect to see the same exact thing. So that was the left one just now, and this is the right side. Okay, maybe not. Okay, that one's just, what is it reading? So we have a sine signal there, but it's offset. Okay, that probably means that maybe we short, or I keep saying we, sorry, I'm not trying to bring you guys into this, but that probably means that a cap might have gotten shorted. So yeah, because there is a sine signal there, but yeah, that's offset by about 200 millivolts because it's at 200 millivolts per division, and we can see it's about 1 whole division above that. So okay, yeah, we have a signal. It's just not what it should be exactly. So I'm gonna have to take the board back out and see where exactly the audio signal for that comes from, and check that capacitor and see if that's what's bad. Alright, one thing that kind of sucks about trying to work on this radio at the moment is that I have not been able to find like a service manual or anything for it. So I really don't have access to like any schematics or anything like that that would help me along, you know, like figure out what goes where. So I'm kind of going in somewhat blind into this thing. But what I have been able to determine is that the signal going to that right output, which is this pin right here, it goes off of here, it goes through a via, and then it comes off into this area. So the signal, yeah, comes in here, goes through a via, comes to this side. There's this, there's these resistor dividers here, and there's 2 of them because obviously we got 2 outputs. But one of them goes into this 6-pin device right here. It's like a SAW 23.6. Actually, it's smaller than that. It's like the tinier version. And I can't really tell exactly what the markings on this are. It looks like it says C3B. But I'm not sure. It's really difficult to see. That's as best as I can make it. But I think what this probably is just a protection diodes for the outputs right here, in case there's, you know, some sort of ESD or whatever. That'd be like, you know, electrostatic discharge, so that it doesn't damage like any of the circuitry. So I think that's all that's doing there. So that doesn't really seem to be a problem at the moment, or at least not that I can tell. So the signal goes to that end of that resistor. The other end of that resistor goes here, goes to this capacitor. This capacitor took me a bit to figure out like where it went, but using this little trick that I just kind of picked up from Mike's electric stuff is to take kind of like a big gauge wire like this, kind of fan it out, and put one of the probes like on the side right there, so you can kind of like rake around and try to figure out where that signal goes. There is a little thing about that it could be dangerous if there's like a capacitor, you know, that's like charged to a high voltage. You end up shorting like a low voltage line or whatever. You could damage things. And there's really not much going on in like the audio signal devices or anything like that, so I don't think that's going to be a big deal. It shouldn't really affect anything for what I'm doing here. But so what I did is I put the one probe on the capacitor right there, and I just kind of like started, you know, kind of like going around to all the audio chips and stuff like that to try to figure out, you know, where it went. And I finally narrowed it down to this chip right here. So one of the pins right there is the has like direct continuity to that capacitor. And yeah, I've already figured out which one it is. I don't know the exact number, but it's on that chip. And that chip there is a Pioneer numbered part, and that's a PM9012A. And of course, that's one of those things that you can't really get unless maybe you like pull it off of a, like another donor board or whatever. But I have not been able to find any for like, for purchase, just in case. But as we saw, the signal looks fine, so I'm not suspecting that there's anything wrong with that particular chip just yet. And there's like pretty much a direct connection between that and that capacitor, or as best as I can tell, that's what it is. So I'm kind of suspecting that maybe this capacitor here, it may be like lower capacitance than it should be, but I'm not really able to measure it in circuit here very well, so I don't know what it actually measures. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that capacitor and I'm going to pull the one on the opposite side and compare them both. I'm going to make sure that I know which one's which and see what they measure. If this one measures a different value than the opposite side, which goes to the other channel, which would have been the left side here, so this side here, and yeah, so it goes to that side. And that one, the signal there seemed to be okay, so we'll compare the two and see if there's any discrepancies there. If that one's different, then it's very likely that capacitor is bad, and I'll have to replace it. And I'm going to use hot air for this. I had already cleaned this board up pretty well, but I do want to add some flux to these just to help them separate a little better here and have the solder flow. So, yeah, oh well. Okay, so the one that's up here, that would be the left side capacitor, and that's the one that seemed to be okay. Okay, so that's the left side capacitor. I'm just going to set it down on the bench here. And then this is the right side capacitor. Okay, so I've got the two capacitors sitting here on this lid. The left side is the left side subwoofer and the right side is the right subwoofer connection. So we are going to measure these using this thing, and let's get our first one here. So the left side reads, try to get it here in the shot. Let's see what it says. And alright, so it reads about 11. It's probably supposed to be like a 10 microfarad capacitor. Now let's check the right side capacitor. Nope, that looks about fine too, so they're both about the same. Well, shoot, I guess it's not the capacitor. Aha! This might mean something. So I just realized that on the bottom of this capacitor, there is still carbon left over. Could it possibly be that this carbon was acting as more of a resistor than anything and allowing some of the signal, to just kind of go straight through instead of going through the capacitor? I mean, I could clean it up and test that. It's just I'm gonna have to like put this thing all back together again the way I had it just to see. But I guess that's worth checking because that carbon stuff is pretty conductive. Like when it's on the board, it would make a difference. So it's possible that this could have been the whole reason why that signal was reading with like such a high offset. So I'll clean this up as best as I can. We'll reattach it and see if it makes a difference, I guess. Okay, I got the capacitor cleaned up, and that capacitor was more in kind of like a direct line of the shot, or like, where this polyfuse kind of went. So it's possible that could have affected something. I'm kind of debating taking this chip off here or diodes, whatever they are. I'm not entirely sure. Checking underneath that as well. Make sure that there's nothing funky going on there. And maybe I can actually check and see if there's like a diode drop between some of these pins that would, pretty much confirm that this is like a diode pack. It basically have 4 diodes in there. I'm already in here. Might as well check that. I just got to make sure that I don't like accidentally flip it around or anything like that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and reflow these capacitors back on. Let's go ahead and remove this chip here. Okay. Well, that wasn't entirely a waste of time. There is a little bit of carbon deposits underneath that chip, so I'll be sure to clean that as well. And I'll check the pins and see what goes to, or try to figure out, like what's what here. I don't think it's being used as any sort of amplifier, just because of the way it's connected. Okay, I finished testing this little 6-pin device, and I didn't find any obvious problems. And as I mentioned, it does appear to be a diode. So I'm going to go ahead and reattach it. Yeah, it was a bit of a pain, but looks like it's on there pretty good now. Alright, so this component here that I think is marked C3B, I haven't actually been able to find that particular part in any of the code books that I found online. So I'm not entirely sure if that is the exact number, but it appears that it is a dual diode. And what I was expecting at first was something like this, where we had like the anode here on this side, we had a cathode on that side, and here like the cathode and the anode were connected together, and we had a cathode on that side. And just because of the way it's wired, that's kind of what I was expecting. But it appears to be something more like this, where we have a common anode in the center of both sides, and then the cathodes are the ones that are just kind of off by themselves. And this is it's consistent on both sides, so it looks like that's what it actually is. And this is kind of how it's wired in the circuit. So there is no like markings that I can tell on the thing, you know, other than the lettering that would indicate, you know, which one's like pin 1 or whatever. So it wouldn't even matter if this thing got like flipped over, it would still function the same, or it should, according to what I'm measuring on here. So it looks like this is kind of what we have. So we have like our subwoofer right input is the one, or output is the one that we're having problems with. So it looks like this here comes from that Pioneer chip. It goes through this 1 or 10 microfarad capacitor, and then through a resistor that appears to be an 82 ohm resistor. I have it marked here with a question mark just because I'm not entirely sure if that's what they're actually supposed to be. The one on this side measures slightly higher than the one on this side. Now this one's closer to 85, and this one's hovering around like 82 or so. Even though I don't think that would like make that big of a, or it shouldn't really make that big of a difference on here for how this output seems to be like sitting so high up. Basically both circuits are identical, and you know, this goes right here through this 22k resistor to ground. The center pins of the 6 pin device here, they both go through a 4.7k resistor up to a, what I'm assuming is a positive rail somewhere, a positive supply, because these are both tied together and they go through a resistor to the center pins on each one, and then these two are tied directly to ground. So if that carbon buildup that was underneath this capacitor was acting like a resistor, which would have been something more like this, then we can expect that this signal here would have been sitting up at a higher potential than it should have been, because otherwise it looks like it would have just kind of been floating at about ground somewhere, because this here is like kind of, you know, pulling down to ground. So we would have expected this to be sitting at ground, and then the signal over here would have been like AC coupled. But if this signal here is already like sitting at a level, you know, like above ground, and we have basically a resistor here from the carbon buildup that was underneath the capacitor, then we would expect this to, you know, be sitting higher as well. So now that I've cleaned it up, I've determined that there doesn't really seem to be anything wrong here. All these resistors in the area all seem to measure fine. The only thing we have is the signal coming directly from that Pioneer chip, both here and over here. The only thing that sucks is that the only way to test this is to pretty much put it almost completely back together. So I would have to like solder a wire coming out of there and solder a wire coming out of there that I can clip my scope to. I guess for the time being we'll just test it as is, and if this is still measuring kind of high, then we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, I've got it all set up again, and I'm playing that 107 hertz tone. We can see that we are getting the signal on the left channel, but it's the right one that we're concerned with. So let's go ahead and switch the RCA now over to the right side, and hey, it's revolving around ground again. So it looks like we're good. Yeah, so maybe that's all it was. It was just that carbon underneath the capacitor was causing it to, the signal to, you know, just kind of bypass the capacitor somewhat, so it was making it stay higher than it should have. So yeah, this appears to be working fine now. As you can see, I'm raising the volume and it is going up. If I manually tweak the settings here, let's see, let's adjuster, let's go to the speaker level settings here, and if I raise just the subwoofer, we should see that signal there increase, and it is increasing. So that appears to be working just fine. So thankfully I didn't have to do any more probing there or any troubleshooting, and it looks like that was it. Carbon resistors, yeah. Let's try playing something through the audio here. We should see the, I mean, you're not going to hear it because I don't have any speakers or anything hooked up to it, but we should at least see, you know, like some of the lower tones kind of playing through there. So here we go. And okay, we have this thing a little too high. It's there you go. Seems we have it's playing audio, so it's got a, the signal's going to vary quite a bit, but it looks fairly clean, so I think it should be fine now. Yeah, I can't really simulate engine whine here on the bench, although I'm fairly certain that if all that carbon there was causing problems with stuff, you know, conducting like on the board, and it was making, you know, signals go where they shouldn't have been, then now that it's a lot cleaner and fairly clean, then it should eliminate all that. But I'll find out once I stick it in the car. And of course, since I didn't actually put all the screws back on that bottom board there, I gotta take everything apart before I can even start to put it back together. So yeah, at least it's just this that has to come off. One thing I kind of forgot to mention, if you're like taking one of these apart, there's a couple of tabs. There's one on this side and one on that side that are normally kind of like bent outwards. That's kind of like to hold this frame up here from coming apart, but they do need to be bent inwards before this board will come out. Otherwise it's going to be locked onto that. It kind of helps support the front, so that's kind of why it's there. So if you're permanently like putting this thing back together, you know, just make sure those are bent outwards. Oh, one other thing that I kind of forgot to mention just now is that for some reason on these radios, they don't use any thermal interface material between the amplifier and this heatsink. So I've actually placed a thermal pad there in between just to kind of help the heat transfer a little bit. Could also use like paste or whatever. I just didn't want it to be all messy, so I used a little piece of kind of like one of those little sill pads. All right, let's go test it out in the car. I've been driving the car for a couple days now after I fixed the radio, and great news, everything's working properly like it should be. The audio doesn't sound all distorted anymore, there's no more engine whine, and the subwoofer is working again. So it's like basically back to normal, like as if nothing had ever happened. And which leads me to, you know, I'm still kind of baffled as to what exactly happened with that amplifier when the subwoofer output shorted out. Well, I'm happy to have this thing working again, so thanks guys for watching once again, and I'll see you guys around the bench.